Hello and welcome to this presentation. Are you feeling overwhelmed by too much information? Information overload is actually a new problem. For most of human history, most people's information problem was having too little information. However, because of technology and Moore's law, the human information problem is changing. In 1999, E.O. Wilson wrote this in one of his books. He said that we are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. And as bad as the problem was in 1999, it's only gotten worse in the decades since. Most of these information sources didn't even exist when E.O. Wilson made his comment about drowning in information while starving for wisdom. So when we talk about data and information and technology, it's helpful to remember that we need also wisdom about these topics. So this talk is about the foundation of wisdom, which is the 4 respects. The first respect is respecting morality. Now, conversations about morality can become complex debates where you're splitting hairs in hypothetical situations, but the simple basis for morality is this: how do you treat other people? Do you treat people with abuse, or do you treat people with respect? Now, if you're a person who abuses, people who abuse, they'll abuse people, they'll abuse power, they'll abuse facts and information for selfish gain. Fear-mongering and gaslighting are examples of abusive behavior where facts and information have been weaponized for selfish benefit. Politically speaking, people with abusive morality tend to support authoritarian rule when it comes to politics. Now, most of us are on the respect side of morality. Our morality is to treat people with respect. We respect humans in an egalitarian kind of way. We respect personal freedoms. We respect personal growth. In one form or another, we're talking about some form of the golden rule. And in a political perspective, a respect-based government, respect-based politics is about egalitarian, respectful democracy. Now, when it comes to golden rule, that's most people in most cultures. The exact language will be different, but that's most of us. But it's not all of us. There are people that choose the moral compass path of abuse. Right? Genghis Khan is an example of this, and he made this quote, which strikes right to the heart of what we're talking about. The greatest happiness, according to Genghis Khan, is to vanquish your enemies, to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth, to see those dear to them bathed in tears, to clasp to your bosom their wives and daughters. The greatest happiness. If that's your morality, then the river of respect splits for us on this issue. If you have Genghis Khan morality, then we will not be able to have respectful agreements on more complex issues further downstream. But if you have a respectful morality, a respect-based moral compass, then we can have respectful disagreements down the road, which is helpful for complex wisdom. Respect number 2, respect biology. You are a different version of yourself when you are afraid or in a life-threatening situation. This is literally true. This is observably, measurably different when you are in a life-threatening crisis situation. Technically, we would be talking about the autonomic nervous system, which has a sympathetic autonomic nervous system and a parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, and the way your body behaves if you are afraid or a life-threatening situation is objectively, measurably different. Your biology is trying to survive, and it will, in a crisis situation, narrow its energy usage and narrow the way your body responds in a measurably, noticeably different way. Now, we talk about the autonomic nervous system with its sympathetic and parasympathetic responses in analogy of fight or flight and rest and digest, and it kind of gets the idea that there are these two different versions of you based on if you're threatened or afraid or not. But another analogy that I like, that I think is even more useful, is the analogy of the tightrope in the field. In the case of sympathetic autonomic nervous system, what we think of as fight or flight, I refer to that as the tightrope. In a crisis situation, when you're afraid, you become narrow-minded in a good way. Right? If you were somehow forced to walk a literal tightrope, 20 stories up in the air with no net, where if you fell, you died, your body would try to help you survive. Your autonomic nervous system would narrow your focus, and your mind would not be thinking about whatever you were thinking about 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, before somebody forced you on that tightrope. Whatever was a big deal, right? That report that's due next week, that thing somebody said about you in the hallway the other day that was bothering you and running through your mind, those things would leave your mind, and your focus would be completely on your next step being exactly where it needs to be, because if I step here, I live, and if I step anywhere else, I die. Your body, your autonomic nervous system, would be trying to help you survive by narrowing your focus in a good way. You'll probably never find yourself literally walking a life and death tightrope, but you will find yourself in crisis situations. If you're in your home and you're doing whatever you're doing, watching television, working on a report for school or for your job, whatever you're doing, and suddenly you realize there's a fire in your house, this same autonomic nervous system tightrope narrow focus happens in a good way. You care about the fire and surviving the fire, and the people you care about surviving the fire, right? That becomes your focus. That's a good thing. You don't want your mind distracted. You don't want to be thinking about 100 different things in a crisis situation. So your body helps us with this. Your biology helps us. When you're safe, when you're not afraid, the biological term for this is the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system takes over. Your body literally, objectively, physically, measurably changes. Analogy for this is rest and digest, or the analogy I prefer, the field. This is where you have safe steps in a number of directions. You don't have to put your foot here to live and anywhere else you die. Things are much broader. You're much more free to explore and to think and to move toward a restful, enjoyable experience. Either way, whether you want to call it fight or flight and rest and digest, call it tightrope and field, call it the autonomic nervous system, whatever language you want to use, the point is that you are a different version of yourself when you are afraid or in a life-threatening situation. We need to respect the biology that our bodies have in this area. Respect number 3, respect complexity. We are complex social creatures. We all want to be seen and heard. We all want to love and be loved. We all want a home for our identity. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs is one of the most widely used and respected ideas when it comes to understanding human complexity. I have overlaid the tightrope in the field onto Maslow's hierarchy here, because when your physiological needs are not being met, your focus is very narrow on getting those needs met. Like you're in a fire situation, like you're walking on a tightrope. You don't care about little details that you have the luxury of caring about as you move up Maslow's hierarchy and as your needs are being met. Now, traditionally, this pyramid on Maslow's hierarchy is drawn the other way with a wide base and a narrow top, and that's to represent the fact that everybody, 100% of the human population, desires to have their physiological needs met. And if you're fortunate enough to have those needs met, you move up to another level, but that's not 100% of all humanity, all humans. It's a smaller percentage. And if you're fortunate enough to have your safety needs met and move up another level, again, that's a smaller percentage of humanity as a whole. So the number of people is decreasing as you move up. But for you personally, the experience of moving up Maslow's hierarchy is like moving from the tightrope to the field. Self-actualization is the freedom to explore the field and what you want to do there. The fourth respect is to respect perspective. Perspective allows you to understand complex situations from different viewpoints. The image of the man is not changing, but you can see him in two different ways by allowing your perspective to change. The girl is the same in both pictures, but your understanding changes when your perspective changes. Changing your perspective does not change your circumstances. Changing your perspectives does not change the data. However, viewing complex situations from multiple perspectives does allow you to have a better understanding and to make better decisions. Perspective comes from inside our brains, and as our brains evolved, at first, our brains were focused on survival, the reptile brain. That's the oldest part of our brains. And then, as brains evolved, the complex social limbic brain then emerged and developed and grew stronger over the reptile brain. And then, as our brains evolved, the newest part of our brains, the neocortex, evolved. The neocortex sits on top of the reptile and limbic brains. The neocortex gives us two additional perspectives: science and spirit. The science perspective is where we're incredibly impersonal. This is where we distinguish between rational fear and irrational fear. This is how we add days to our lives. Richard Feynman made this great quote about science and the science perspective. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. The science perspective, our neocortex, allows us to take an impersonal view of the world around us. We talk about critical thinking, and from a scientific point of view, critical thinking is not being critical of other people. It's not sitting on your porch and complaining about everybody that goes past your, drives past your house or walks past your house. Oh, look at what they're wearing. Oh my gosh, can you believe the music they're listening to? Oh, what is he thinking? What is she thinking? That's terrible, right? Critical thinking is not flipping through channels and griping about what you're seeing. That's not critical thinking in the scientific perspective. Critical thinking in the scientific perspective is being critical about your own thinking to ensure that you're not fooling yourself. Gravity does not change based on your morals, your belief, or your faith. Right? It is objectively real in the world around you. And the way we understand the objective real world around us is through an objective, impersonal, scientific perspective that our neocortex supports. Our neocortex also supports a more inward reflection, not about the world out there, but about the world inside, about your experience of consciousness. Right? We are conscious beings. And that consciousness that we experience, it's private. You can't know somebody else's inner conscious experience unless they tell you. And even if they tell you, right, words don't always adequately capture the experience of consciousness. If you had a friend that got engaged, and it's a friend you hadn't seen in a while, so you hadn't met the fiance, and you see a friend, they tell you they got engaged, you're like, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me about your fiance. It would be weird if your friend talked about their new fiance using scientific, objective, factual language. If they said, well, he has brown hair, she drives a Honda, he likes to wear flannel shirts, she was born in Tennessee, he is lactose intolerant, she prefers Wendy's over McDonald's. Okay, right? Those may all be 100% true, 100% factual, but it's not really the question I'm asking. When we're talking about the experience, tell me about the person that you're going to marry, right? You expect them to answer in a way that reflects some of the inner experiential, conscious, human spirit stuff. And when we talk about that stuff, we use language in poetic, non-literal ways because many times our human experiences are too big for literal scientific language. When I'm with him, I am the person I want to be. When I am with her, I feel like the world is right. He is my soulmate. She completes me. You are so good at switching between these perspectives that you take them for granted. Consider how the words, my heart hurts, has different meaning depending on context. If you say, my heart hurts, to your best friend, you're using your social perspective, your social lens to process that conversation and how to speak and how to react. If you say those same words, my heart hurts, to your cardiologist, you're speaking in a more scientific perspective, and your cardiologist is certainly listening and processing in a more scientific lens, a scientific perspective. The same words, my heart hurts, have different meaning depending on the perspective, the lens, the context that you're using. If you're by yourself and you suddenly feel some pain in your chest and you think, oh, my heart hurts, your survival perspective is going to focus your attention in a narrow way, in a good way. Right? Is this a life-threatening situation? If it is, whatever I was thinking about 5 minutes ago doesn't really matter. I want to live. And the spirit perspective allows us to talk more poetically, to think more poetically, to express ourselves in a less literal, more experiential way. Poetry is an example of this spirit perspective and spirit lens. If someone hurts you, still leave your heart open. This is how the pain will find an exit. Signed, an exit. So, wisdom is about understanding why, and each of these perspectives has been optimized over time for a specific purpose, a specific why. The survival perspective, the why is to survive. Very simple, very narrow, very focused, right? Life and death, stay alive. When the survival perspective is being used, it has a narrow focus. Let's get through this crisis. The social perspective, the why is to thrive as a person, to thrive with other people in a society. The science perspective why is to live longer. Understanding the world around you in objective, true ways allows us to add days to our lives. The spirit perspective is to live better. Understanding your consciousness, your experience of life, what's going on inside you, allows you to add life to your days.